Hey everyone, Synchrony here, talking about Living Story lore as always. I'm going to be elaborating a little bit more on the Fractured patch, more so than I did last time. Just fair warning, I will be going over some spoilers here, so if you haven't done the Fractured content and you don't want to be spoiled, work on that, come back when you're done, and have a listen. You will enjoy it, that's for sure. Okay, so in the last video I demonstrated the path that goes from Thaumanova reactor to the Chaos Crystal Caverns, and how Scarlet's campaign plays out really nicely, and all of the facilities that she's responsible for lay on that path, on that channel, on that ley line. And the whole point of the last video was kind of showcasing that channel, but also speculating on the networks that might exist, kind of how different paths might line up based on the location of elder dragons, things like that. And it was really speculative, and we didn't have too much going on there. There weren't that many locations or landmarks that really facilitated that network analysis, let's say. But since then, I've been really looking at the Thaumanova reactor and trying to map out different aspects of it. And the whole point of studying the Thaumanova reactor from the last video was that the Thaumanova reactor happened to sit on an intersection of at least two very powerful channels of magic. We think we located the one, which was Scarlet has been sort of following over the course of the Living Story, and now if we consider that one to be the primary one that we look at, now the task is to find the other one, or possible other ones. Now, a lot of things come up here. Now, I'm always basing my channels as running through the Thaumanova reactor, or that general area there, in kind of southwest Brisbane Wildlands / Metrica Province. And if any of you have started to do this, you'll know that trying to come up with any patterns is very difficult. Mainly because it seems like everything is connected. You can always point here, 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 or you throw a bunch of dots on the map, and it seems like, oh, maybe this is a pattern. It's very difficult to come up with something real. So in order to kind of constrain our results, in order to narrow down what we're looking at, I think it's really important to kind of set a baseline of assumptions about what we should expect to happen in these channels, in these paths. And to do that, we have to think about what Scarlet is after. It is sort of a combination of Scarlet's motives, what we think her motives are, and what the Thaumanova reactor does, the channel that the Thaumanova reactor / Chaos Crystal Caverns, what that channel does, what the behavior there is, and the patterns there are. So it's kind of all that mixed with some other kind of funky stuff. For example, think about it sort of like fluctuations in space and time. So it's a combination of different things. But just to list them out, what I think anytime we investigate a potential path, we need to think about these following things. The first one, first and foremost, I think it has to be crystals. We have to look for where there are more crystals, and if we follow the path of crystals, hopefully we come up with another path, maybe. So lately I've been searching all around Tyria, chatting with people on forums, trying to locate different crystal formations within Tyria, anywhere where we can find crystals around, and so starting to take those into account. That's the first one. The second one is less clear than that, which is mapping out the locations of the creatures that get warped in and out of the Thaumanova reactor area and the Toxel Bog in that area, as well as the Chaos Crystal Caverns. Really mapping out where those creatures lie. That part is very tricky, but we have ways around that. And then lastly, which is going to sound maybe a little bit strange, is mapping the fluctuations in reality. That sounds sort of strange, right? So in particular, things like strange portals or strange events that are out of place for our space and time. I will elaborate more on that, you will see for sure, but those are the three things. The crystals, the locations of the things that we've been seeing getting warped in and out, and then fluctuations in what I'll call the fabric of reality, let's say. Okay, so if any of you are searching out there, I think you have to try to account for as much of those as possible in any given path. So what I've been doing is I had the primary path mapped out, and then I started pointing the Thaumanova reactor in the direction of dragons and the locations of dragons, and maybe, speculating on those. But as I kept refining my search and looking at these different patterns of stuff around Tyria, a new path emerged. One that I didn't necessarily expect, but I kind of had a hunch there might be something about this. And it really does account for a lot of the same things that that our main path accounts for, and it also accounts for a lot of things our main path didn't account for. So we're going to go through that one right now. Okay, the first one was from Thaumanova reactor to Chaos Crystal Caverns. This new one, it goes from the Thaumanova reactor, lower Brisbane Wildlands area, over to sort of like Citadel of Flame, kind of, even above Fireheart Rise, basically. I'm going to put it on the screen right now. That seems like a strange path, doesn't it? Well, I'm going to go into a lot of different details about how I came to that conclusion, and I'm going to keep going back to those three kind of assumptions or three things that we need to account for any path. Okay, stick with me. It's going to be quite a bit of information, but I really want to try to make it as digestible, as accessible as possible. So let's get into it. Okay, first the crystals. Now, let's see our original path, and then what I wanted to do was actually go back to that path and see where, aside from the Chaos Crystal Caverns, where there are crystal formations around Tyria, and in particular with this path. But so I went all around Tyria, any mountain that I could find, any hole in the wall that I could get into to look for crystals. A lot of this was in sort of dredge-inhabited areas, but not all of them, that's for sure. Okay, let's look from the Chaos Crystal Caverns, and let's go west. Okay, first, do any of you even remember what the Flame and Frost patch, what the facility in there was? All I remember was drilling in, fighting some dredge. There was a cold room, saving some slave miners, and then fighting the two bosses, right? And there was lava. There was lava everywhere. But what I forgot about was that this place was a giant mine, and they weren't just mining rocks, they were mining the azurite crystals. I was watching a playthrough, and I totally forgot that they're mining loads and loads and loads of azurite crystals. These bright blue, kind of, they look almost like ice, but they're not. These blue crystals. And they have heaps and heaps of them. They're huge. So, huge crystal formation right there. So that was the first that I looked to. So we had the Chaos Crystal Caverns, and then we have the Molten Facility in Scarlet's campaign. As we move westward, we look to, this is a Skrit colony, let's say that. I believe it's pronounced Kolkorensburg in Dredgehonk Cliffs in the northern area. And this place has these bright purple crystals lining the walls. There's more kind of story and lore to it, but I'm just suffice to say for now that there's a fairly large crystal formation there. So that was another one. Heading just a little bit west, in between Lornar's Pass and Gandaren Fields area, it's sort of like in between the grass and the snow, there's this thawed out area. A couple of these little caves have crystals in them. It's technically in Gandaren Fields. It's the areas called Icegate Gorge and the Overlook Caverns, kind of in there. There's technically two little locations in that same patch. So check out the caves in there if you want to take a look. Now, these are not huge formations, but there are crystals there. Okay, so for this path, that's all the crystals we see. I haven't found any crystals west of Lion's Arch. So I'm still looking. If any of you want to help out with that, there's not a whole ton of terrain to look through, I think, just on that path, but I haven't found anything. So if you guys want to check those areas out, I looked, but I couldn't find it. But anyways, those are the crystals, and very much in line with the path. So a lot of neat convergence right there. Okay, now I want to hold off on this path for now. I did just want to show those crystals from the beginning, just to kind of reinforce some of the things we talked about last time and really offer credence to the path that we showcased last time. And for anyone who had doubts, I think this is just kind of helping inch along the idea that this is a path, given that the crystal formations from anywhere around here that I've seen basically all fall in this path. Shout out to Steven on the GW2 Lore forums for really inspiring me to start looking at the crystal formations that exist around Tyria. That led to some important, really important breakthroughs. So shout out to him. He was a huge help there. Okay, now to showcase this new path, the one that kind of emerged on its own when I was essentially plotting all the data, all the points that are of relevance to the Thaumanova reactor, and just the ideas surrounding the Thaumanova reactor and eternal alchemy and all these things. First, I said that the primary path had all the crystals I had seen. That's not technically true. There is one other crystal formation that I've seen in Tyria, and that is in an area called Darkhoof Heights in Snowden Drifts. This is a really interesting little spot. It's a skill point. You have to fight a boss for it, but you go into this cavern with some ice imps, and you kind of go along the side, and then you come into this little room. It's not a small room, it's a decent-sized room, and there are these crystals of all these different colors. Pretty big crystals. Bigger than, little things you see on the ground, that's for sure. So it was really interesting. It's like this little pocket of crystals. So that was really neat. So now for real this time, aside from that one, these are all the crystals I've seen around Tyria, as far as like crystal formations in the ground. Okay, so that's one thing. If we have the primary path, the only other candidate path that we have right now is some path that contains this crystal formation, because it is quite a bit far out from the main path. So it seems like it might be a separate path. Well, that's just the crystals. Let's look at the other things that we need to account for. I was looking at the set of creatures that get warped into the Thaumanova reactor, and I started trying to... The thing is, you can't map all of the creatures that get warped into the Thaumanova reactor because there's just a huge variety. And the varieties they're so common around the world. So if you map every location of a river drake or something like that, you're just gonna go crazy. They're everywhere. They're in, I would imagine, probably every zone you could find a river drake, something like that. So what I tried to do is find the more unique species of creatures at Thaumanova reactor and try to map those. That just kind of narrow that down and see where those lead me. Okay, so I'm going to put up some markings on the screen, and these are going to represent the uncommon species or creatures that were in the Thaumanova reactor. So first, starting from the Thaumanova reactor, heading east, is the Veteran Nightmare Hound. The Veteran Nightmare Hound was in the story mode of the Thaumanova fractal, and the thing about the Nightmare Hound is it doesn't actually exist in the real world, in name, anyway. Not that I've seen, and I don't think the wiki has any entries for it either. However, these hounds, I think, are a different size than a normal hound. Keep in mind, you go in as an Inquest operative, an Inquest saboteur, and you go in, and the hounds come in, and the hounds are huge, right? They're of this they're bigger than regular Nightmare Hounds. The only other place I've seen Nightmare Hounds of this size are in the Brisbane Wildlands, in Joy's End, in the southeast corner. And these enlarged Nightmare Hounds belong to one of the hunters that go around there. There's a dynamic quest that pops up, and they walk around together. So I put that dot there to represent that one. The next one, heading east, is, there are these dynamic events that happen in the Thaumanova reactor where you have to destroy these veteran creatures that pop up, and one of the events is called Destroy the Misplaced Poison Creature. And the thing that comes up is a veteran rotting oak heart. So the only creature that fits this description of this rotting treant creature is the champion oak heart in Queensdale. It's this corrupted kind of creature that has now warped into the Thaumanova reactor, and you have to kill it. I don't think there's any other creature that fits this description, and there's been a bunch of discussion about why is this creature that gets warped in. So there's that one. Then also uncommon, so easier to find from the Thaumanova reactor, is the aquatic creature that gets warped in, which is the giant angry Arctic crab. And there's technically not something called a giant angry Arctic crab out there in the world, but the closest thing is the non-angry version, let's say, that only exists in either Frostgorge Sound or Snowden Drifts, and I have them marked here. And then finally, the veteran Icebrood wolf. at the very top, only shows up in Frost Gorge Sound at the very top right of the map. I think it's called the Ice Climb or the Snowy Climb, something like that. Okay, so that fits in line with that set of that little crystal formation in Snowdon Drifts. There's sort of like a little path that gets made there. Not incredibly clear, but sort of. Okay, so we've gone through two of our sort of necessary components of a path. We've done the crystals and the locations of the Thaumanova creatures. Now notice that the locations of these unique or uncommon creatures didn't fall on the other path very much at all. Maybe the Nightmare Hounds, but other than that, nothing. So that is somewhat peculiar. But now let's look at perhaps the strongest reason for this path, which is the fluctuations in reality. I was being sort of vague there just to kind of keep it short at the beginning, but now let's elaborate on that a little bit. Okay, so what do I mean by fluctuations in reality? That sounds very strange. Now, what I mean by this is, consider the fundamental things that we're talking about here with the Thaumanova reactor, Chaos Crystal Caverns. The big picture. What is happening here? Rifts in space and time are being created. Things from across the world are being warped somewhere else. Creatures from the future, apparently, are warping in. Lots of really strange things, different kind of mergings of realms kind of happening, generally through portals, sometimes not. One of the things that makes the Thaumanova reactor, not the reactor itself, but the regions surrounding it so special and so interesting are these fluctuations in this reality, this kind of constant portaling, shifts in space and time where creatures get sent back and forth. But something that a lot of people don't realize is in the Brisbane Wildlands, I talk about the Toxel Bog a lot because it's one of the locations, just like the Thaumanova reactor, where creatures warp in and out. But from the Toxel Bog, there is a region west of that. It doesn't look like it, but there is a region west of that called Aurora's Remains. This is kind of paying homage to Guild Wars 1 and the lore there, where you go in. If you walk into this area, you get waved at by this shining blade. It looks like ghosts. It looks like a bunch of spirits walking around, and you proceed to engage in a quest with them against the White Mantle from like Guild Wars 1 prophecies. But it's very interesting because they don't know they're ghosts. They don't know they're dead, basically. What's happening is you are replaying one of the quests from Guild Wars 1. There's a quest, I'm sorry, I don't remember the name or any of really the details, but it's basically you help out the Shining Blade, fight the White Mantle, and kill the demagogue that is residing in this area. You can do that in Guild Wars 2, in this area, Aurora's Remains. And it's this weird thing because it's like Guild Wars 1 quest, this entire setup, they don't know they're dead. They are playing out their lives as if they are in their own dimension, in their own realm, in their own time. So it's this really strange breach of that barrier, them coming into our world, our time, and going about their business. Very strange, very, very interesting, very peculiar kind of thing that happens right there. Okay, I wanted to highlight that one because I think that's by far the best example of the kinds of things I'm going to talk about. So if you haven't checked that out, check it out. It's pretty cool. Okay, that's one thing. So let's map that out, and let's start mapping out different instances of these kinds of things, but also any kind of activity where we have beings essentially coming in and out of other realms, broadly speaking. I think it will become clear as I go through. Okay, so that was the first one. Also in Brisbane Wildlands, we have a similar kind of thing, where if you go north to a place called Hidden Lake, you have a similar kind of thing. You have a bunch of spirits kind of sitting around this hill, and you talk to them, and they're clearly not alive, but they don't know they're dead. So there's a very specific distinction I should make now, which is I'm making a very specific qualitative difference between ghosts, like Ascalonian ghosts, the fighters that remained from the faux fire. There's a difference between those and the kinds of ghosts that like guard tombs and stuff like that. Because if you approach them, they say, "Here lies the tomb of this," or "This is my grave. You need to stop messing around." That's a different kind of thing. These are spirits that transcend or breach time and are essentially living their lives in our time. And this is another one of those. I mentioned the White Mantle thing, now Hidden Lake, where you have these like merchants and NPCs from Guild Wars 1, and they're talking like, "Oh yeah, where did I go?" They sort of are here, but a little bit without their memory, and they say, "Oh yeah, you were collecting these eyes and trading blah blah blah," and they say, "Oh yeah, that's what I was doing. Okay, cool." And so it's that sort of thing. So that's another strange kind of breach in the time and space idea, this fluctuation, these merging, transient merges of realities. Another type of these breaches of our reality are underworld portals that we see around Tyria. And from these portals, we have shades and acts. If any of you can pronounce that correctly, great, but I cannot. We see those coming out of nightmare portals and the shadow behemoth that spawns there. So you have those there. Another breach in our time and space. Just over the border of Queensdale in Kessex Hills, in the North Right area, we have a little zone called Blackroot Cut, where we again have underworld portals spawning up, shades, all that kind of stuff. And also in the area we have, you'll notice that there's this very specific connection between the underworld portals existing, and there's always some very powerful necromancer just kind of hanging out nearby. There's a necromancer in the God's Lost Swamp in Queensdale. There is a necromancer in Kessex Hills. Their name is Drathor. It's like a centaur necromancer. And that starts to be kind of a pattern that we start seeing in this path as well. Okay, if we keep going east, a little bit northeast, the next little mark I made was in Harathi Hinterlands. This is something that I came across totally by accident. I was actually looking for crystals, like I said, I'm looking in the walls, I'm looking everywhere, and I came across this little cave, so bizarre. This little cave where, again, similar to the Brisbane Wildlands, there are these spirits of bandits, but they're not like, they're not ghosts. Ghosts are usually have a kind of a blue, even if they're not full fire ghosts, they usually have like a blue kind of tint to them. These did not. These look like bandits, like proper bandits, but transparent, and you can fight them. And as you go just barely a little bit deeper in the cave, you see this other bandit named Slick Ricky, something like that. But as you walk in, they disappear, and then you see bones there. The cave is clearly very old. There's like a little sign that says this cave is clearly very old, something like that. So another one of those things where it's not about a ghost per se, but it's really like the bandits are living their life in that spot. They just happen to be in our world when they shouldn't be. So that's another little neat thing. As we keep going east, now where I mentioned the crystal formation before in Snowdon Drifts, there's actually inside that cave, in order to get your skill point, you have to fight a powerful, I believe she's a Mesmer Norn, in that cave full of crystals. She's been like kidnapping children and eating them or something for power. Very dark, very bizarre. But she does that, and also very interesting is that she is sort of like a spirit of the Raven. She's very Raven-centric, which, as I checked in the wiki, the Raven spirits are most tightly connected to the underworld. So that's again another tie to cross-realm, cross-dimensional activity. So that was really interesting. That's a really neat thing where it's not just the crystal formation, but ties to the underworld in the exact same spot, exact same location. And then much farther east, past all the icy stuff, is a spot in Fireheart Rise where it's this camp where all these pact members have been killed. They've been murdered. The wiki speculates that this was based on a powerful necromancer that we encounter in some of the personal story quests. I put this one down because there's a lot of strange kind of illusory, it's sort of mesmeric in a way, but they're like illusory creatures. It's hard to explain, but to me it fit the criteria of the cross-realm type of thing. So all of these things fit exactly on this path. Like, exactly. The only one that's not on this path, but is actually on the other primary path, is a necromancer named Bria, who is, it looks like she's sitting right on the crystals, but it's not. They're sort of on opposite ends of that zone, where there are a bunch of little char cubs playing around in front of her house. She's an Ascalonian ghost, but, I said, oh no, not Ascalonian ghosts, but she's a very special particular case, because she can retain all her power as if she wasn't a ghost. So it's this really weird thing that happens there, and then there's a lot of shadow fiends, shade type things in that area as well. So again, all of these cross-realm dimensional breaches, these things lie on these paths. Well, on the primary path, and this new thing that I'm saying is a path. Okay, so that's some data for you. And now even more. Okay, one other thing I want to plot are the locations of flesh reavers around Tyria. Now, flesh reavers are not technically underworld species or anything like that, but they do come out in a lot of times around these underworld portals for some reason. And I see here in the wiki that, I'm just going to read it straight from the wiki, it says, some have even been seen coming through portals leading into the mists. So that's enough for me to include them. So I'm putting them here. Now I'm showing some marks around the map. You'll see these marks line up pretty tightly with the paths that we have. These marks that you see here are all the flesh reavers in all of Tyria. Okay, so there aren't that many that show up around Tyria, and all of them are essentially accounted for in these two paths. There's no other path that I can make that it would account for this. Okay, so taken together, we see a pretty tight relationship there with that new path in terms of where that particular crystal formation lies, all of the locations of the more unique Thaumanova creatures that get warped in, and also very tightly with the locations of these kind of necromantic cross-dimensional breach sites in Tyria that we've seen. This may or may not be exhaustive, I'm not sure. I'm only one person, I check as much as I can, and really these are the only sites that I've seen that have these relationships. I'm perhaps as surprised as you are, because I'm looking at the dragons thinking, whoa, there's going to be something really interesting there, but when you plot it out, that's not what happens. So that's that. So I was thinking, oh, maybe it's not the case really that they are, some might say, the world is big. Those might not be two distinct paths, but one very broad path throughout the world. But I don't think, well, this is kind of a more meta thing where I'm just thinking, I don't think ArenaNet would do that. It's just sort of like saying, oh yeah, by the way, the entire world is smeared in this channel of magic, so you can expect anything to happen. I do think they would hopefully take the more interesting route where this particular channel is. These particular channels are distinct and crossing. But it's entirely possible that we have, for example, this is one very broad channel, and then you have something more kind of perpendicular from, for example, Zaitan to the Thaumanova reactor totally crossing through. We don't know. That's the truth is, we just don't know. But hopefully this gives you something else to think about. I've been getting tons of really neat comments, a lot of support for the idea. I think a lot of people are starting to get more invested in the lore and thinking about it in different ways, trying to come up with patterns. Now, I do want to talk about the implications of some of these things, particularly the cross-realm breaching that we see here. What's really interesting to me is that, and really I'm going to focus on the Aurora's Remains section. What's really interesting to me is the vividness of that entire section. The spirits that come out, they interact with you. You go on a quest with them. You repeat that quest that you did in Guild Wars 1, essentially. It's like capturing a glimpse of that moment in time in our world. Now, where else have we seen something like that in Guild Wars 2? Capturing a glimpse of an event that happened in history and reliving it in our world, essentially. This is like an open world fractal. I mean, imagine if you walk in that area, you get hit with agony, there's more mobs, and it's more difficult. in the end, you're going through this process, kind of hopping up and down these mushrooms, going around. There's mobs there. There's kind of like a mini boss, and then there's like the main boss at the end, who's a champion. It's very fractal-esque in how they set it up, and I think it's very interesting considering we lie on a path with the actual fractals of the mist that are in Lion's Arch. Very, very peculiar. I think that's a very interesting relationship that we have to think about more and see how other things might play out. And I think it's just a really cool tie-in. I mean, it may be right, it may be wrong, but I don't think you can deny that it's very, very similar to a fractal in that sense. Speaking of fractals, one thing I was really trying to do once I found that primary path, I kept thinking, okay, if Scarlet can only travel on this path, as far as we know, that's if we assume that Scarlet can only travel on this path in time or in space or whatever, maybe the fractals, maybe Dessa and her lab are also restricted to that path. I'm just going to say it right now, I don't think that's the case anymore. I really wanted it to be true. I thought that would have been so, so, so cool. But it's just so easily tossed out the window when we say, oh yeah, but we fight the Jade Maw. A fight in the Jade Sea, basically. So there's no way that works anymore. But everything else, I mean, basically we're getting replays of the dungeons that we had. We have the urban fractal, and so many of the other ones are kind of nondescript. Like, they could happen anywhere, essentially on that path. Any, generic dredge site, generic underground lava with the Grawl. All those things can happen anywhere, and particularly when you throw in something like, oh, well, it's kind of a memory of a fractal. You can't really take it word for word, the details, so it kind of gets messed up there. And the Jade Sea thing totally throws it out the window. So Dessa kind of has the power, in a sense, she has the power that Scarlet wants, in that she can kind of travel almost anywhere, but at the same time she's so restricted in what she can do with that it becomes almost useless. So with this new channel, it emerged on it emerged on its own, which is so important to have happen. It's so easy to get biased by what you think is happening, but when I just plotted this stuff, this path just kind of came out. So that's neat, but on the flip side, we have no idea what this means. In order to fit a line most appropriately to that path, we don't pass directly through the Thaumanova reactor, but we can imagine that just that area in general, on the whole, is very heavy in magic. So I don't think it necessarily matters that it crosses exactly at Thaumanova reactor, but just that the area close by or adjacent to it has that property. So then, if it doesn't necessarily cross directly at Thaumanova reactor, where would it cross? Well, it looks kind of like it would be connecting at, just in general, Magus Falls. It appears to be densely packed with forests. In Guild Wars 1, there's an area called the Falls. In general, it could be something like Ventari's Refuge. I know a lot of people are going to speculate on that, just even saying those words. Oh, Ventari's Refuge. The Falls, is forests, is like Jungle Dragon, everything Jungle Dragon. Man, we don't know. But if anything, this kind of does point it in that direction. If we take it just sort of as at face value, these paths appear to be directed westward towards the jungle, and there's a ton of speculation that there is a Jungle Dragon there. So who knows? I don't want to say the Bloodstone, like Bloodstone Fen, because that's a little bit too far north, but who knows? Otherwise, I don't really have too many other ideas. It seems like a somewhat anticlimactic path to have come up. And also, even though it does appear that Scarlet is sort of moving westward with her campaign, I find it hard to believe that we're going to get all the way that far west by the time she sort of cycles out. We've known for a while that her story arc is ending soon, and it's probably going to be early next year, so probably spring at the latest it's going to finish up. So we don't know exactly what's happening. So if anything's going to happen, it probably needs to happen pretty soon. So that's what I really wanted to go over today. I wanted to just reiterate the path that we found last time, build on that a little bit to show more crystal formations in that area, and then also showcase the new path that has emerged when we take into account things like the more unique creatures that exist in the Thaumanova reactor, more crystals, although it's really realistically only just that one, and then really the highlight, which is the breaches in space and time, the kind of rifts in reality that merge our reality with a different one. So I just wanted to showcase that. One thing I also wanted to bring up okay, so I've been talking about these ley lines of magic as now being draconic, being dragon related, the magic of dragons. Scarlet's dialogue really threw a lot of people, myself included for sure, totally tossed out preconceived notions about what chaos magic was and stuff like that. Some clarification was had in the forums and stuff like that, and currently I'm thinking of it, the discrepancies were that we were told Thaumanova reactor ran on chaos magic. That was a fact until last week. Thaumanova reactor runs on chaos magic. We know there's dragon related stuff kind of going on, but what Scarlet said is, no man, they had it wrong the whole time. What they thought was chaos magic was dragon magic the whole time. Did that mean that the entire channel is dragon magic, or did that mean that at that location what they thought was chaos magic was actually dragon magic? That's the thing. It's a little bit unclear right now, so it's kind of hard to tease apart different things. So what I'm trying to say is, which channel is dragon and which channel is chaos? And I don't think that's a distinction we can make right now, and maybe it's a flawed approach to even think about it that way. But I just want to share with you the confusion that exists right now in the lore community, at least in the lore community in my head. That's some confusion that exists. People, leave comments if you have any questions, if you think something I said is totally wrong, if you have other things. Something I really want to know is, if you find crystals anywhere else, post them. Just please tell me about them. Find those. If there are any other things that you consider to be necromancer kind of related, particularly with breaches in space and time, post those. Let me know about those. All those things are very important. As a community, we need to start putting those things together, and help me, and I will post it and do all that stuff, but I'm only one person, so I can't do that. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening. I will see you guys next time. Bye. Next time. Bye. Next time. Bye. Next time. Bye. Next time.